My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. I never imagined that walking into a lawyer's office to finalize what I thought was a simple estate matter would end with discovering my own sister had been systematically stealing my inheritance for months. The manila folder in Attorney Williams' hands contained documents that would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty, but in that moment, all I could focus on was the familiar handwriting that looked like mine but somehow felt wrong. My sister Elena sat beside me, her manicured fingers drumming nervously against her designer purse, and when she smiled at me with that same warm expression I'd trusted my entire life, I had no idea I was looking at the face of my betrayer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the sun-drenched suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, Elena and I were known as the Rodriguez sisters, who could conquer anything together. She was 3 years older, naturally charismatic, and possessed the kind of effortless confidence that made people gravitate toward her at parties and family gatherings. I was the quieter one, the planner, the sister who kept detailed spreadsheets of our shared expenses and remembered everyone's birthdays months in advance. Our parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and a dream of giving their daughters opportunities they never had. Papa worked construction for 25 years, his hands growing more weathered with each passing season, while Mama cleaned offices downtown before starting her own small catering business. They saved every penny they could, investing in real estate across Phoenix as property values climbed steadily through the early 2000s. By the time I graduated college, our family owned 3 rental properties and the modest 2-story home where Elena and I had shared a bedroom until she left for college. The dynamic between Elena and me had always been complicated. She was the social butterfly who could charm her way out of any trouble, while I was the responsible one who stayed home to help Mama with the catering business and Papa with managing the rental properties. When Elena announced she was moving to Los Angeles to pursue acting after college, our parents were heartbroken but supportive. When I chose to stay in Phoenix and work as a property manager for a local real estate company, they seemed relieved to have one daughter who would remain close to home. Elena's LA dreams proved harder to achieve than she'd anticipated. For 6 years, she bounced between serving jobs and small acting gigs, calling home every few weeks to ask for money to cover rent or unexpected expenses. I watched our parents drain their savings to support her aspirations, never questioning whether Elena was being entirely truthful about her circumstances. She had always been persuasive, and her stories of almost landing major roles or being just one audition away from her big break kept hope alive in all of us. When Papa suffered his first heart attack 3 years ago, everything changed. The medical bills mounted quickly despite insurance coverage, and the stress of managing the rental properties while caring for him became overwhelming for Mama. I took over more responsibilities, handling tenant relations, maintenance issues, and the financial aspects of the properties while working my full-time job. Elena flew home for Papa's surgery but returned to LA within a week, claiming she couldn't abandon a promising acting opportunity. Papa's second heart attack 18 months later was more severe. During his final weeks in the hospital, he called Elena and me to his bedside for what would become the most important conversation of our lives. His voice was weak, but his mind was clear as he explained the will he and Mama had carefully constructed with their attorney. The family home would go to Mama, with the understanding that upon her death it would be split equally between Elena and me. The 3 rental properties would be divided immediately, with Elena receiving the duplex on Maple Street and I would inherit the single-family homes on Oak Avenue and Pine Boulevard. "Maisha," Papa said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "You have been here, taking care of everything. These properties are your security, your future. Elena will have her inheritance too, but you have earned this through your dedication to our family." Elena nodded solemnly, tears streaming down her face as she promised Papa she understood and supported his decision. We hugged each other tightly in that sterile hospital room, united in our grief and our commitment to honoring his wishes. Papa died on a Tuesday morning in September, and the funeral brought together extended family members I hadn't seen in years. Elena delivered a beautiful eulogy about Papa's work ethic and devotion to family, and I felt proud to be her sister as she spoke with such eloquence about the man who had shaped our values. During the reception at Mama's house, Elena pulled me aside to discuss the inheritance. "I want you to know I'm completely comfortable with Papa's decision," she said, her dark eyes serious and sincere. "You've done so much more than I have to help them. I don't deserve an equal share of the rental properties." I protested, explaining that Papa had wanted to be fair to both of us, but Elena insisted she felt good about the arrangement. "Besides," she added with a self-deprecating laugh, "I wouldn't know the first thing about being a landlord. You're so much better at that kind of thing." The probate process moved slowly, as it often does with multiple properties and complex family assets. Attorney Williams, who had handled our parents' legal affairs for over a decade, guided us through the paperwork with patience and professionalism. Elena flew back to LA after staying for 2 weeks, but she stayed in close contact via phone and email as we worked through the legal requirements. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding the process and asked thoughtful questions about property values, rental income, and long-term investment strategies. During this period, I threw myself into managing the properties with renewed dedication. The Oak Avenue house needed significant plumbing repairs, and the Pine Boulevard property required a new roof after a severe monsoon damaged several shingles. I coordinated with contractors, managed insurance claims, and worked overtime at my regular job to cover the upfront costs until insurance reimbursements arrived. Elena offered to help financially, but I assured her I could handle everything until the inheritance was finalized, and we both had clear ownership of our respective properties. 6 months after Papa's death, Attorney Williams called to schedule a meeting to sign the final transfer documents. "Everything is ready," he explained over the phone. "We just need both sisters present to execute the deed transfers and complete the inheritance process." I was excited about finally having official ownership of the Oak Avenue and Pine Boulevard properties, both of which had increased significantly in value over the past year, as Phoenix real estate continued its upward trajectory. Elena flew in from Los Angeles the night before our appointment, staying at Mama's house as she always did during visits. She seemed more nervous than usual, claiming she was anxious about a big audition she had scheduled for the following week. We spent the evening going through old photo albums with Mama, reminiscing about Papa and sharing memories that made us laugh through our tears. Elena was particularly sentimental, telling stories about how Papa used to take us to construction sites when we were children and let us wear his hard hat. "He would be so proud of how you've managed everything," Elena told me as we prepared for bed in our old shared bedroom. "I honestly don't know what our family would have done without you these past few years." Her words warmed my heart and reinforced my belief that despite our different paths in life, we remained.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Fundamentally connected by love and mutual respect. The next morning dawned bright and clear, typical of Phoenix in early spring. Elena and I drove to Attorney Williams' office together, stopping for coffee and pastries along the way. She seemed more relaxed than she had the night before, chatting about her latest acting class and a potential commercial she was hoping to book. I felt grateful that despite the geographical distance between us, we could still enjoy each other's company and support each other through important life transitions. Attorney Williams' office occupied the second floor of a modest building in downtown Phoenix, decorated with Southwestern art and heavy wooden furniture that conveyed both professionalism and warmth. His secretary offered us water or coffee while we waited in the reception area, and Elena declined both, claiming her stomach was too nervous to handle caffeine. I attributed her anxiety to the significance of the moment, rather than any underlying concern about the proceedings themselves. When Attorney Williams called us into his office, he had 3 thick folders arranged on his mahogany desk, each labeled with property addresses and legal descriptions. He explained that we would review each transfer document carefully before signing, ensuring that both Elena and I understood exactly what properties we were receiving and what responsibilities came with ownership. The process was more complex than I had anticipated, involving multiple forms, notarization requirements, and detailed legal language that Williams patiently translated into plain English. We started with Elena's inheritance, the duplex on Maple Street that generated steady rental income from 2 long-term tenants. Williams walked us through the deed transfer, pointing out key provisions and explaining Elena's new obligations as a property owner. She listened attentively and asked several informed questions about property taxes, maintenance responsibilities, and tenant rights. When it came time to sign, she reviewed the documents carefully before adding her signature with a flourish. "Congratulations," Williams said warmly. "You're now officially a property owner." Elena smiled and thanked him, then turned to squeeze my hand. "1 down, 2 to go," she said cheerfully. "I'm so excited for you to get your properties too." Next came the Oak Avenue property, a charming 3-bedroom house that I had spent countless hours renovating over the past year. Williams spread the deed transfer documents across his desk, pointing out the legal description, property boundaries, and transfer details. As I read through the paperwork, something felt off. The signature line at the bottom already contained what appeared to be my name, written in handwriting that looked remarkably similar to mine but somehow didn't feel quite right. "I'm sorry," I said, looking up at Attorney Williams with confusion. "It looks like someone already signed this document." Williams frowned and pulled the papers closer, examining the signature with concern. "That's strange," he murmured. "These documents were supposed to be blank when I prepared them yesterday." He looked at Elena, then back at me. "Carmen, did you sign these documents at some point without me present?" I shook my head emphatically. "No, absolutely not. I haven't signed anything related to these properties except what we've done here today." Williams' expression grew more serious as he examined the signature more closely, comparing it to the signature Elena had just provided on her own documents. The handwriting was remarkably similar to mine, but there were subtle differences in the letter formation and pen pressure that suggested it might be a forgery. Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face flushing slightly. "Maybe there was some kind of clerical error," she suggested. "Or perhaps Carmen signed something earlier and forgot about it." Her voice carried a defensive edge that I had never heard before, and when I looked at her directly, she avoided making eye contact. Attorney Williams pulled out a magnifying glass and examined the signature more carefully, then compared it to samples of my handwriting from other documents in my file. After several tense minutes, he set down the magnifying glass and looked at both of us with grave concern. "I'm afraid this signature appears to be fraudulent," he said slowly. "The handwriting analysis suggests someone attempted to forge Carmen's signature on this document." The room fell silent except for the humming of the air conditioning system. I felt my heart racing as the implications of Williams' statement sank in. Someone had forged my signature on legal documents related to my inheritance. The only people who had access to these documents were Attorney Williams, Elena, and myself. Williams was a respected professional, with decades of experience and no motive to commit fraud. That left only one possibility. "Elena," I said quietly, turning to face my sister directly, "do you know anything about this?" She was staring at the floor, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. But there was also something else there that I had never seen before. Guilt. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think." But even as she spoke, I knew with horrible certainty that it was exactly what I thought. My sister, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had forged my signature on legal documents related to my inheritance. The betrayal cut through me like a physical wound, stealing my breath and making my vision blur with unshed tears. Attorney Williams cleared his throat professionally. "I think we need to stop this meeting immediately and contact the authorities. Forgery of legal documents is a serious felony, and I'm obligated to report suspected fraud to the proper authorities." He reached for his phone, but Elena suddenly spoke up, her voice stronger but filled with desperation. "Please, wait. Let me explain what happened. It's not what you think. I was trying to help Carmen, to protect her interests. Everything I did was for the greater good of our family. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and I realized that my sister was not only a forger, but was also attempting to justify her criminal behavior by claiming altruistic motives. Williams set down his phone but kept his hand near it, clearly prepared to make the call if Elena's explanation proved unsatisfactory. "Go ahead," he said sternly. "But I want you to understand that anything you say may be used against you in legal proceedings, and I strongly advise you to consult with your own attorney before making any statements." Elena took a shaky breath and launched into a story that would change everything I thought I knew about my sister and my family. 6 months earlier, while the probate process was ongoing, Elena had received a call from a developer who was interested in purchasing all 3 of our inherited properties for a luxury condominium project. The offer was substantially higher than current market value, but it required all 3 properties to be part of a single transaction. "I tried to call you," Elena said, looking at me with pleading eyes. "But you were dealing with the roof repairs and the plumbing issues, and I knew you were stressed about everything." The developer said he needed an answer within 48 hours, or he would move on to other properties. "I thought if I could just sign the preliminary agreements on your behalf, we could present you with this amazing opportunity without you having to worry about the details." Williams shook his head grimly. "That doesn't explain why you forged your sister's signature on ownership transfer documents. Preliminary purchase agreements don't require deed transfers." Elena's face crumpled as she realized her story wasn't holding together under professional scrutiny. "I got confused," she admitted. "The developer's attorney sent so many documents and I thought I was just signing preliminary paperwork. But then one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I had signed documents that transferred ownership of Carmen's properties into my name. I was going to tell her about the sale and split the profits equally, I swear. I never intended to steal anything from her." The magnitude of Elena's betrayal began to sink in as I processed her words. She had not only forged my signature, but had also transferred ownership of my inherited properties to herself without my knowledge or consent. If the sale to the developer had gone through, I would have lost my inheritance entirely while Elena collected the profits from all 3 properties. "How much was the developer offering?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside me. Elena hesitated before answering, clearly reluctant to reveal the full scope of her deception. $2.8 million for all 3 properties, she finally whispered. The number hit me like a physical blow. My inherited properties, which I had valued at approximately $400,000 each, were apparently worth far more as part of a development package. Elena had been planning to sell my inheritance for nearly 3 times its individual value, without telling me about the opportunity or the transaction. Williams was taking detailed notes as Elena spoke, documenting her admissions for potential legal proceedings. "Elena," he said carefully, "do you understand that what you've described constitutes multiple felonies? Forgery, fraud, theft by deception, and potentially conspiracy if the developer's attorney was aware of the fraudulent signatures." Elena began sobbing uncontrollably, her composed facade crumbling completely. "I never meant for it to go this far," she cried. "I just wanted to help our family. Mama needs money for her medical expenses, and Carmen works so hard but never has enough saved. I thought if I could just handle this one transaction, we could all be financially secure for the rest of our lives." The irony of her justification was not lost on me. Elena claimed she was protecting my financial interests by stealing my property and selling it without my knowledge. She had appointed herself the guardian of our family's well-being, while systematically defrauding the sister who had sacrificed years of her life to care for our parents and manage their properties. "Where is the money from the developer?" Williams asked. "Has the sale already been completed?" Elena shook her head quickly, explaining that the transaction was scheduled to close the following week. She had been planning to tell me about the sale after it was finalized, presenting it as a surprise windfall that would benefit our entire family. "I was going to give you half of everything," she insisted, looking at me with desperate eyes. "Even though I would own all 3 properties on paper, I was planning to split the money fairly. You have to believe me, Carmen. I would never steal from you intentionally." But I no longer believed anything Elena said. Her story kept changing, her justifications grew more elaborate, and her claims of altruistic motives rang hollow when weighed against the calculated nature of her deception. She had forged legal documents, transferred property ownership fraudulently, and arranged a sale that would have netted her nearly $3 million while leaving me with nothing. Williams excused himself to make several phone calls, leaving Elena and me alone in his office for the first time since the forgery had been discovered. The silence between us was deafening, filled with years of trust that had been shattered in a single morning. When Elena reached out to touch my hand, I pulled away instinctively, unable to bear physical contact with someone who had betrayed me so completely. "Carmen, please," she whispered. "You're my sister. We can work this out between us. We don't need lawyers and police and all this drama. I'll transfer everything back to you right now, and we can pretend none of this ever happened." Her words revealed how little she understood about the damage she had caused. Trust, once broken by deliberate deception, cannot be simply restored by reversing transactions or promising to behave better in the future. "You forged my signature," I said quietly, looking directly into her eyes. "You stole my inheritance. You planned to sell my property without telling me. And now you want me to pretend it never happened because we're sisters?" Elena nodded eagerly, clearly hoping that family loyalty would override legal consequences and personal betrayal. "Family forgives," she said, echoing words our parents had often spoken when resolving childhood conflicts between us. "Blood is thicker than water, remember. We're Rodriguez sisters. We stick together no matter what." But in that moment, I realized that Elena had already broken the bonds that had held us together since childhood. She had chosen money over family, deception over honesty, and personal gain over sisterly love. Williams returned to his office carrying several legal documents and wearing the grim expression of an attorney who had dealt with similar cases before. "I've contacted the district attorney's office," he announced. "They're sending investigators to collect evidence and interview both of you separately. Elena, I strongly recommend that you contact a criminal defense attorney immediately. Carmen, you'll need to decide whether you want to pursue civil remedies in addition to the criminal charges that the state will likely file." Elena's face went pale as the reality of her situation became clear. She was facing serious felony charges that could result in significant prison time and financial penalties. Her acting career, already struggling, would be effectively over if she was convicted of fraud and forgery. The life she had built in Los Angeles would crumble, and she would return to Phoenix as a convicted felon with limited prospects for employment or housing. "This will destroy me," she said, looking at me with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Is that what you want? To see your own sister go to prison for trying to help our family?" Her attempt to make me feel guilty for her own criminal behavior was both manipulative and revealing. Even when caught in the act of defrauding me, Elena was trying to position herself as the victim and me as the vindictive sister who refused to show mercy. "You destroyed yourself," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I didn't forge documents or steal property or lie to attorneys. Those were your choices, Elena. Now you have to live with the consequences." Williams nodded approvingly at my response, clearly recognizing Elena's manipulation tactics from previous cases. The investigators arrived within an hour, a seasoned detective named Martinez and a white-collar crime specialist named Thompson. They separated Elena and me into different offices, conducting detailed interviews about the inheritance process, our family relationships, and the events leading up to the discovery of the forged documents. I answered their questions honestly and completely, providing documentation and timeline details that helped them understand the scope of Elena's deception. During my interview, Detective Martinez explained that Elena's case would likely be prosecuted as multiple felonies, including forgery, fraud, and theft. The fact that she had targeted family property and attempted to manipulate legal proceedings would likely result in enhanced penalties if she was convicted. He also explained that I would have the option to pursue civil remedies to recover any financial losses or property damage resulting from Elena's actions. When the interviews concluded, Elena was arrested and taken into custody pending a bail hearing scheduled for the following morning. I watched through the office window as she was led to a police car in handcuffs, her designer clothes and perfect makeup a stark contrast to the criminal proceedings unfolding around her. The sister I had loved and trusted my entire life had become a stranger, someone capable of betraying family for money and then attempting to justify her actions as altruistic. Williams drove me home that evening, both of us emotionally drained by the day's revelations. Mama was waiting at the house, having heard about Elena's arrest through a phone call from Elena's one permitted call from jail. She was confused and heartbroken, unable to understand how one daughter could have stolen from another, or why family conflicts had escalated to criminal charges. There must be some mistake, Mama insisted, tears streaming down her weathered face. Elena would never steal from Carmen. They love each other. We're a family. I spent hours explaining the legal documents, the forged signatures, and the planned sale that would have cost me my inheritance. Mama listened with growing horror as she realized that her older daughter had systematically defrauded her younger daughter while claiming to act in the family's best interests. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process the complete upheaval of my life in a single day. 24 hours earlier, I had been excited about finally receiving my inheritance and looking forward to sharing the milestone with my sister. Now Elena was in jail, facing felony charges that could result in years of imprisonment. Our family was shattered, our relationships permanently altered, and my trust in the people closest to me had been destroyed. The financial implications were also staggering. The properties Elena had tried to steal were worth far more as part of a development package than I had realized. The developer's offer of $2.8 million represented a life-changing sum that could have provided financial security for generations. Instead of celebrating this windfall together, Elena and I were now adversaries in criminal and civil proceedings that would likely drag on for months or years. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Elena's deception became clear through legal discovery and forensic accounting. She had not only forged my signature on property transfer documents, but had also created false correspondence between herself and me, suggesting that I had agreed to the sale but preferred to remain in the background during negotiations. Her planning had been methodical and calculated, suggesting that her betrayal was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a deliberate scheme to defraud me of my inheritance. The developer, when contacted by investigators, claimed he had been unaware that Elena did not legitimately own all 3 properties. However, his attorney had failed to conduct proper due diligence on the ownership transfers, raising questions about whether they had willfully ignored red flags in order to complete a profitable transaction. The entire deal was placed on hold pending resolution of the criminal charges and property ownership disputes. Elena's bail was set at $50,000, which she could not afford without assistance from family members. She called me from jail, asking if I would help secure her release by posting bail or providing character references for the court. Her request was both heartbreaking and infuriating, revealing how little she understood about the damage she had caused to our relationship, and my trust in her judgment. "I can't help you with bail," I told her during our brief, monitored phone conversation. "You stole from me, Elena. You forged my signature, and tried to sell my property without my knowledge. I need time to process what you've done and figure out how to move forward." Elena cried and pleaded, promising to make everything right if I would just help her get out of jail, but I had learned that her promises were worthless when weighed against her actions. Mama ultimately borrowed against her own property to post Elena's bail, a decision that further strained our family relationships and created additional financial pressure. Elena returned to Mama's house pending trial, confined by court order to Arizona and prohibited from contacting me directly. The sister, who had once been my closest confidant and biggest supporter, was now legally forbidden from communicating with me without court supervision. The criminal case moved slowly through the court system, with Elena's attorney attempting to negotiate a plea agreement that would minimize her prison sentence in exchange for full restitution and admission of guilt. The prosecution was reluctant to offer lenient terms, given the calculated nature of her fraud and the substantial financial losses involved. Meanwhile, I filed civil lawsuits to recover the properties Elena had fraudulently transferred to herself and to seek damages for the emotional distress and financial disruption her actions had caused. 6 months after that devastating day in Attorney Williams' office, I stood in a different lawyer's office, signing documents that officially restored my ownership of the Oak Avenue and Pine Boulevard properties. The criminal case against Elena was still pending, but the civil court had ruled definitively that her property transfers were fraudulent and void. The developer's offer was no longer available, as the delay had allowed other properties to become available for their project, but my inheritance was secure. Elena ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for a sentence of 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution for my legal expenses and to perform community service related to elder abuse prevention. Her dreams of acting success in Los Angeles were effectively over, replaced by the reality of a felony criminal record and the stigma of having defrauded her own family. The betrayal that had shattered my world in a single morning ultimately taught me lessons about resilience, independence, and the difference between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. I learned that forgiveness does not require forgetting, that love does not mandate trust, and that protecting yourself from people who have proven themselves untrustworthy is not selfish but necessary for emotional and financial survival. Today, as I prepare to close on the sale of one of my inherited properties to fund the expansion of a nonprofit organization I've started, I think about how differently my life might have unfolded if Elena's deception had succeeded. The money she tried to steal has instead become the foundation for helping other people who have been victims of family financial fraud, turning my personal betrayal into a source of support and advocacy for others facing similar situations. Elena will be released from prison next month, and Mama has asked if I would consider meeting with her to begin the process of rebuilding our family relationships. I haven't decided yet whether such a meeting would be healing or harmful, whether enough time has passed for genuine accountability and change, or whether some betrayals are simply too fundamental to overcome through apologies and good intentions. What I do know is that the sister who sits in that prison cell is not the same person I trusted with my inheritance and my love. Whether she can become someone worthy of a new kind of relationship remains to be seen. For now, I'm focused on building a life that reflects my values, protects my interests, and honors the memory of Papa, who worked so hard to provide his daughters with opportunities for security and success. The properties he left me have become more than just real estate investments. They represent his faith in my ability to manage resources wisely, his recognition of my dedication to family, and his hope that his hard work would continue to benefit future generations. Elena's attempt to steal that legacy ultimately failed, but the lessons learned from her betrayal will shape my decisions and relationships for the rest of my life. The months following Elena's arrest became a blur of legal consultations, court appearances, and sleepless nights spent questioning everything I thought I knew about family bonds. My days were consumed by meetings with attorneys, forensic accountants, and investigators who dissected every aspect of Elena's deception with clinical precision. Each new revelation cut deeper than the last, painting a picture of systematic manipulation that extended far beyond the forged documents we had discovered in Attorney Williams' office. Detective Martinez called me on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Elena's arrest, with information that would fundamentally alter my understanding of the timeline. Their investigation had uncovered email communications between Elena and the developer dating back 8 months, well before Papa's death had even been finalized through probate. She had been planning this theft while our father lay dying in the hospital, calculating how to maximize her profit from his death before his body was even cold. The developer's representative, Marcus Chen, had initially contacted Elena through social media after researching property ownership records in our neighborhood. He had specifically targeted families with elderly property owners, anticipating inheritance situations that might create opportunities for bulk purchases at below-market prices. Elena had responded enthusiastically to his inquiry, immediately positioning herself as the family's designated real estate decision-maker despite having no legal authority to make such claims. Their correspondence revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even the experienced investigators handling the case. Elena had researched property values, studied real estate law, and even consulted with a different attorney about inheritance procedures, all while maintaining the facade of a grieving daughter focused solely on family support. She had methodically gathered information about Papa's estate planning, pumping me for details about property conditions and rental income under the guise of sisterly concern and investment curiosity. The forensic accountant assigned to the case discovered that Elena had opened a business checking account in both our names, forging my signature on bank documents just as she had done with the property transfers. This account was intended to receive the nearly $3 million from the property sale, with Elena maintaining sole access to the funds despite my name appearing as a co-owner. She had planned every detail of the theft, from the initial property transfer to the final disposition of the stolen money. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a detailed spreadsheet on Elena's laptop, outlining her financial plans for the stolen inheritance. She had allocated specific amounts for paying off her Los Angeles debts, purchasing a luxury condo in Beverly Hills, funding an elaborate acting portfolio and headshots, and even setting aside money for cosmetic surgery to enhance her appearance for auditions. A small percentage had been designated for, quote, family gifts, amounts that would have seemed generous to recipients unaware that the money had been stolen from their own relatives. The prosecution team shared these findings with me in preparation for Elena's eventual trial, explaining that the evidence demonstrated clear intent to defraud rather than any misguided attempt to help our family. Elena's claim that she had planned to share the proceeds equally was contradicted by her own financial planning documents, which showed her keeping the vast majority of the stolen funds for personal use while providing minimal compensation to the family members she had defrauded. During this period, I struggled with practical challenges that extended far beyond the emotional trauma of Elena's betrayal. The legal proceedings had frozen all transactions related to the inherited properties, preventing me from making necessary repairs or improvements while the ownership disputes were resolved. Tenants in the Oak Avenue property were complaining about a persistent leak in the master bathroom, but I couldn't authorize major plumbing work without clear legal title to the house. The Pine Boulevard property faced even more serious issues when the city inspector condemned the electrical system, requiring immediate upgrades to meet current safety codes. Without access to the property equity or rental income that Elena's actions had tied up in legal proceedings, I was forced to drain my personal savings to cover emergency repairs and bring the house into compliance. Every dollar spent felt like a double punishment, first losing my inheritance to Elena's theft and then paying out of pocket to maintain properties I couldn't legally access. My regular job at Phoenix Property Management became both a refuge and an additional source of stress. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was understanding about the time I needed for legal appointments and court hearings, but the emotional toll of Elena's betrayal affected my performance and concentration. I found myself making uncharacteristic errors in lease agreements and property inspections. My mind constantly distracted by the ongoing legal drama consuming my personal life. The other property managers in our office tried to be supportive, but their well-intentioned questions about Elena's case reopened wounds every time someone asked for updates. The local real estate community was small enough that news of the fraud case had spread quickly, creating awkward situations when I encountered colleagues at industry events or property management conferences. Some people offered sympathy and support, while others seemed to view the situation as salacious gossip, speculating about family dynamics and asking intrusive questions about Elena's motives. Mama's emotional state deteriorated significantly as the full scope of Elena's deception became clear through the legal discovery process. She had posted Elena's bail believing her daughter's claims of innocent mistakes and misunderstandings, only to learn that the fraud had been carefully planned over many months. The woman who had sacrificed so much to support Elena's dreams in Los Angeles now faced the reality that her financial assistance had enabled someone capable of stealing from her own sister. Our relationship became strained as Mama struggled to reconcile her maternal love for Elena with her growing understanding of the crimes her daughter had committed. She would call me several times a week, crying about the impossible position Elena had created for our family and begging me to consider dropping the criminal charges in favor of a private family resolution. These conversations were heartbreaking, as I watched Mama blame herself for somehow failing as a parent despite the fact that Elena's actions were the deliberate choices of an adult woman. The guilt Mama carried was compounded by financial pressure from Elena's legal expenses and the loss of income from my properties tied up in litigation. She had borrowed against her own home to post Elena's bail, creating monthly payment obligations that strained her modest budget. Elena's court-appointed attorney fees were partially covered by public funding, but various expenses related to expert witnesses and forensic analysis required family contributions that further depleted Mama's resources. Elena's behavior during the pretrial period revealed additional layers of manipulation and self-deception that made reconciliation seem increasingly impossible. Despite being caught with overwhelming evidence of her fraud, she continued to maintain that her actions had been motivated by family loyalty rather than personal greed. She told anyone who would listen that she had been trying to protect me from the stress of complex real estate negotiations, positioning herself as a misunderstood protector rather than a calculating thief. Her attorney encouraged this narrative, suggesting that Elena's actions might be characterized as misguided assistance rather than intentional fraud. They proposed a defense strategy based on family dynamics and Elena's claimed belief that she had implied authority to handle the property transactions on my behalf. This approach required painting me as someone too naive or incompetent to manage my own inheritance, a characterization that was both insulting and completely contradicted by my years of successful property management experience. The preliminary hearings provided my first opportunity to see Elena in a courtroom setting, and the experience was surreal beyond description. She sat at the defense table wearing a conservative business suit, her hair styled professionally, and her makeup applied to project an image of respectability and remorse. When she looked at me across the courtroom, her expression seemed to convey hurt and confusion rather than guilt or accountability, as if she couldn't understand why I was pursuing legal action against someone who had only been trying to help. Her testimony during the preliminary hearings was a masterclass in deflection and rationalization. Elena acknowledged signing my name to various documents, but claimed she had received verbal permission during phone conversations that were never recorded or witnessed. She insisted that her financial planning spreadsheets were merely hypothetical exercises, not evidence of intent to steal. When confronted with the business bank account opened in both our names, she claimed it was established for legitimate family financial planning, rather than as a repository for stolen funds. The prosecutor, District Attorney Sarah Kellerman, methodically dismantled Elena's explanations with documentary evidence and timeline analysis. Phone records showed no conversations between Elena and me during the periods when she claimed to have received verbal authorization for her actions. Computer forensics revealed that her financial planning documents had been created and updated multiple times over several months, indicating ongoing rather than momentary criminal intent. The bank account paperwork contained clear evidence of signature forgery, with handwriting analysis confirming that Elena had signed my name without permission. Watching Elena lie under oath was perhaps the most painful aspect of the entire legal process. This was the sister who had comforted me through childhood nightmares and celebrated my college graduation with tears of pride. Now she was calmly perjuring herself in an attempt to avoid accountability for stealing my inheritance, showing no apparent remorse for the devastating impact her actions had on our family relationships and financial security. The judge presiding over the preliminary hearings, the Honorable Michael Torres, seemed increasingly skeptical of Elena's explanations as the evidence mounted. His questions became more pointed and direct, challenging her claims of innocent misunderstanding and focusing on the calculated nature of her actions over an extended period. When Elena's attorney attempted to argue that family disputes should be resolved through civil rather than criminal proceedings, Judge Torres noted that the systematic nature of the fraud and the substantial amounts involved clearly warranted criminal prosecution. As the case moved toward trial, I was forced to make difficult decisions about my own future and financial security. The legal proceedings were consuming enormous amounts of time and emotional energy, preventing me from focusing on career advancement or personal relationships. My work performance had declined to the point where Janet Morrison suggested I consider taking a leave of absence until the legal matters were resolved, but I couldn't afford to lose my income while my inherited properties remained tied up in litigation. The stress of the situation began manifesting in physical symptoms that I had never experienced before. I developed chronic insomnia, lying awake at night, replaying conversations with Elena, and wondering if there had been warning signs I had missed. My appetite disappeared, leading to significant weight loss that concerned my friends and coworkers. Periodic anxiety attacks would strike without warning, leaving me gasping for breath and struggling to maintain composure in professional settings. My social relationships suffered as well, as I found it increasingly difficult to relate to friends whose biggest concerns involved dating drama or career decisions. The magnitude of Elena's betrayal had fundamentally altered my perspective on trust and family loyalty, making casual conversations about everyday problems seem trivial by comparison. Several friendships faded as I withdrew emotionally, unable to explain the complex legal and emotional challenges I was facing without exposing private family business to public scrutiny. The isolation was compounded by my decision to limit contact with extended family members who were taking sides in the conflict between Elena and me. Some relatives believed Elena's claims of innocent mistakes and pressured me to drop the criminal charges for the sake of family unity. Others offered support but seemed to view the situation as entertainment, asking detailed questions about the legal proceedings and sharing gossip about Elena's behavior during her brief time in Los Angeles. Professional counseling became essential as I struggled to process the emotional trauma of Elena's betrayal, while maintaining enough psychological stability to handle the ongoing legal proceedings. My therapist, Dr. Patricia Reeves, specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, helping me understand that Elena's actions constituted a form of intimate partner violence, despite occurring between siblings rather than romantic partners. The patterns of manipulation, deception, and exploitation were consistent with other cases of financial abuse, characterized by the perpetrator's use of family relationships to gain access to victims' resources. Through therapy, I began to recognize that Elena's behavior during our childhood and young adulthood had contained warning signs that I had dismissed or rationalized at the time. Her tendency to borrow money without repaying it, her elaborate explanations for financial problems that never quite added up, and her skill at manipulating family members into providing assistance without reciprocal support had all been precursors to the more serious crimes she eventually committed. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that my guilt about pursuing criminal charges against Elena was a common response among family fraud victims, who often feel responsible for protecting their abusers from consequences, rather than focusing on their own rights and recovery. She emphasized that Elena's choice to commit crimes was not my responsibility, and that holding her accountable through the legal system was not an act of revenge but a necessary step toward justice and deterrence. The therapeutic process also revealed how Elena's betrayal had triggered deeper issues related to my relationship with Mama and my role within our family structure. I had always been the responsible daughter, the one who stayed close to home and managed practical matters while Elena pursued her dreams. Papa's decision to leave me the majority of the rental properties had validated my contributions to the family, but Elena's theft of those properties felt like a rejection of everything I had sacrificed for our family's benefit. As the trial date approached, plea negotiations intensified between Elena's attorney and the prosecution. The evidence against Elena was overwhelming, making conviction at trial virtually certain, but her lawyer hoped to minimize her sentence through cooperation and expressions of remorse. However, Elena's continued denial of criminal intent and her attempts to blame me for misunderstanding her motives made prosecutors reluctant to offer significant concessions. The plea discussions revealed additional information about Elena's financial situation in Los Angeles that explained some of her desperation to access the inheritance money. She owed substantial amounts to creditors, including back rent, credit card debt, and money borrowed from acquaintances in the entertainment industry. Her acting career had generated virtually no income over the past 2 years, forcing her to rely increasingly on financial support from our parents and risky borrowing arrangements that carried high interest rates and harsh collection practices. Elena's attorney shared this information in an attempt to generate sympathy and explain her criminal behavior as the desperate act of someone facing financial ruin, rather than the calculated greed of a successful fraudster. However, the prosecution argued that Elena's financial problems actually provided additional motive for the theft rather than mitigation, since she had clear personal reasons for wanting access to the property sale proceeds beyond any claimed desire to help our family. The developer involved in the fraudulent transaction, Marcus Chen, had hired his own legal representation and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for immunity from criminal charges. His testimony would be crucial at trial, as he could provide detailed information about Elena's representations regarding property ownership and her claimed authority to complete the sale. Chen's cooperation had also revealed information about other similar schemes targeting inheritance properties, suggesting that Elena's case was part of a broader pattern of real estate fraud affecting vulnerable families throughout the Phoenix area. My own preparation for trial testimony was emotionally grueling, requiring me to review all the documents Elena had forged and recount conversations where she had lied to my face about her intentions and activities. The prosecution team was thorough and professional, but their questions forced me to confront the full scope of Elena's deception and the devastating impact it had on my trust and family relationships. The victim impact statement I was asked to prepare for the sentencing phase of Elena's case became an unexpected opportunity for emotional catharsis and personal reflection. Writing about the financial losses, emotional trauma, and shattered family relationships resulting from Elena's actions helped me articulate feelings that had been swirling chaotically in my mind for months. The process of organizing my thoughts and experiences into a coherent narrative provided a sense of control and purpose that had been missing since the day of Elena's arrest. As I wrote about the inheritance Papa had intended for me and the years of work I had invested in managing our family's properties, I realized that Elena's theft represented more than just financial loss. She had stolen my father's final expression of love and recognition, attempting to erase the legacy he had carefully constructed to provide security for his daughters' futures. The properties were not just real estate investments but symbols of Papa's immigrant dreams and his faith in my ability to honor his values through responsible stewardship. The weeks leading up to trial were marked by increasing tension within our extended family, as relatives chose sides and pressured both Elena and me to reach a private settlement that would avoid the public exposure of a criminal trial. Several aunts and uncles argued that family business should remain private, regardless of the crimes committed, and that criminal prosecution would only create additional suffering for everyone involved. These family pressures were particularly difficult because they came from people I respected and loved, relatives who had supported me throughout my childhood and celebrated my accomplishments alongside Elena's. Their inability to understand why I couldn't simply forgive Elena and move forward privately revealed how little they grasped the magnitude of her betrayal and the systematic nature of her criminal planning. The most painful pressure came from Mama, who begged me almost daily to consider a family resolution that would allow Elena to avoid prison time in exchange for full restitution and a formal apology. Mama's pleas were heartbreaking because I knew they came from genuine love for both her daughters and her desperate desire to preserve some semblance of family unity despite Elena's actions. However, the prosecution team made it clear that even if I wanted to drop the charges, the state had sufficient evidence to proceed with the case regardless of my cooperation. Elena's crimes were felonies against the state of Arizona, not just personal wrongs against me, and the district attorney's office was committed to prosecution as a matter of public policy regarding financial fraud and elder abuse. The realization that I no longer had control over Elena's prosecution was both liberating and terrifying. I no longer bore the responsibility for deciding whether my sister went to prison, but I also couldn't stop the legal machinery that would determine her fate regardless of any forgiveness or reconciliation we might achieve privately. The criminal justice system had taken over our family conflict, transforming a personal betrayal into a public matter with consequences none of us could fully control or predict. As autumn turned to winter in Phoenix, with the trial scheduled to begin after the holidays, I found myself preparing not just for Elena's prosecution, but for the complete reconstruction of my life and relationships. The sister I had trusted completely was revealed to be someone capable of elaborate deception and theft. The family unity I had cherished was permanently fractured by crimes that could never be undone. The inheritance that was supposed to provide financial security had become the source of legal expenses and emotional trauma that would affect me for years to come. Yet beneath the pain and confusion, something unexpected was beginning to emerge. The process of standing up for myself in court, documenting Elena's crimes, and refusing to accept her manipulative explanations was teaching me to value my own judgment and protect my own interests in ways I had never learned during my years as the accommodating younger sister. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on my own needs and values, rather than trying to maintain harmony with family members who didn't respect my rights or welfare. The transformation was gradual and often uncomfortable, requiring me to abandon lifelong patterns of deference and people-pleasing in favor of direct confrontation with people I loved. But as Elena's trial approached and the evidence of her calculated betrayal became undeniable, I realized that learning to protect myself from manipulation and abuse was perhaps the most valuable lesson I could extract from this devastating experience. The woman who would eventually sit in that courtroom to testify against her own sister was not the same person who had walked into Attorney Williams' office expecting to celebrate a family milestone. Elena's betrayal had forced me to develop strength and independence I never knew I possessed, transforming the responsible younger sister into someone capable of standing alone when necessary and demanding accountability even from people she loved. Elena's trial began on a crisp January morning in downtown Phoenix, with the courthouse steps bustling with reporters who had caught wind of the family fraud case through public records. The story of siblings fighting over inheritance money had captured local media attention, though the coverage focused more on the sensational aspects of family betrayal than the complex legal and emotional issues at stake. I arrived early with the prosecution team, wearing the navy blue suit that Dr. Reeves had helped me select as both professional and psychologically empowering. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected from television dramas, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh, unflattering tones. Elena sat at the defense table wearing a modest gray dress and minimal jewelry, her appearance carefully crafted to project remorse and respectability. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she offered a tentative smile that I couldn't bring myself to return, the gulf between us now measured in criminal charges rather than sisterly affection. Jury selection took 2 full days as both legal teams worked to identify 12 citizens who could remain impartial, despite the emotionally charged nature of family financial fraud. The defense attorney, Robert Valdez, sought jurors who might sympathize with Elena's claimed good intentions and view the case as a family dispute rather than serious criminal conduct. Prosecutor Sarah Kellerman focused on finding jurors who understood that criminal behavior required accountability regardless of family relationships or claimed motivations. The selected jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men ranging in age from 26 to 68, representing diverse professional backgrounds and family experiences. Several jurors had adult children of their own, while others had dealt with inheritance issues in their own families. The judge instructed them to set aside personal experiences and focus solely on the evidence presented during trial, but I could see them studying Elena and me, clearly trying to understand how family relationships could deteriorate to the point of criminal prosecution. Kellerman's opening statement was methodical and devastating, outlining the timeline of Elena's fraud with precision that left little room for alternative interpretations. She displayed blown-up copies of the forged documents, bank records showing the fraudulent account, and email communications revealing Elena's premeditation and planning. The prosecutor's voice remained steady and professional as she described Elena's systematic betrayal of family trust, but the evidence she presented painted a picture of calculated greed that shocked even observers familiar with the case. The defense opening statement attempted to reframe Elena's actions as misguided family assistance rather than criminal fraud. Valdez acknowledged that Elena had made serious mistakes but argued that her intentions had been to help rather than harm our family's financial interests. He suggested that the complex emotions surrounding Papa's death and the inheritance process had led to miscommunication and misunderstanding rather than deliberate criminal conduct. The prosecution's case unfolded over 6 days, with witness testimony and documentary evidence building an overwhelming case against Elena. Attorney Williams testified about the discovery of forged signatures and his immediate recognition that criminal activity had occurred. Detective Martinez walked the jury through the investigation process, explaining how forensic analysis had revealed the systematic nature of Elena's fraud over many months. The developer Marcus Chen provided crucial testimony about his communications with Elena, describing how she had presented herself as the authorized representative for all 3 properties, despite having no legal right to make such claims. Chen's testimony revealed Elena's sophistication in discussing real estate transactions and her apparent knowledge of legal procedures, contradicting any claim that her actions resulted from innocent confusion or misunderstanding. The forensic accountant presented detailed analysis of Elena's financial planning documents, showing how she had allocated the stolen proceeds for personal expenses while providing minimal compensation to family members. The business bank account opened with my forged signature was presented as evidence of Elena's intent to control the stolen funds entirely, despite claiming she planned to share the money equally. My own testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case, requiring me to recount Elena's lies and manipulation while maintaining composure under intense scrutiny from both legal teams. Kellerman guided me through the timeline of Elena's deception, from her initial expressions of support for Papa's inheritance decisions through her attempts to justify the fraud after being caught. The experience of testifying against my sister was surreal and heartbreaking, transforming our private family conflict into public testimony recorded by court reporters and observed by strangers. Valdez's cross-examination attempted to portray me as vindictive and unforgiving, someone who had chosen criminal prosecution over family reconciliation out of spite rather than justice. He questioned my decision to pursue charges despite Elena's offers to return the properties, suggesting that my refusal to accept private restitution revealed ulterior motives beyond recovering stolen assets. His questions were professional but pointed, designed to make the jury question whether Elena's punishment fit her crimes. I maintained my composure during cross-examination by focusing on the facts rather than the emotions underlying the case. Elena had forged legal documents, stolen inherited property, and planned to keep nearly $3 million that didn't belong to her. Her offers of restitution after being caught didn't erase the systematic nature of her fraud or restore the trust she had deliberately destroyed through months of careful deception. The defense case lasted only 3 days, with Elena's testimony as the central element of her attorney's strategy. She took the stand wearing the same modest dress she had worn throughout the trial, her voice soft and emotional as she described the financial pressures that had motivated her actions. Elena claimed that her desperation to help our family's financial situation had led her to make poor decisions, but she maintained that criminal intent had never been part of her planning. Elena's testimony was skillfully crafted to generate sympathy without admitting to the specific intent required for criminal conviction. She acknowledged signing my name to documents but claimed she believed she had implied authority based on our family's close relationship and shared financial interests. She described the inheritance process as confusing and overwhelming, suggesting that her actions resulted from misunderstanding rather than deliberate fraud. Under Kellerman's cross-examination, Elena's carefully constructed explanations began to crumble under scrutiny. The prosecutor methodically confronted Elena with her own financial planning documents, email communications, and timeline evidence that contradicted her claims of innocent confusion. Elena's attempts to explain away the documentary evidence became increasingly strained, revealing inconsistencies and implausibilities that undermined her credibility with the jury. The most damaging moment came when Kellerman presented Elena with her detailed spreadsheet allocating the stolen inheritance proceeds, asking her to explain how personal luxury purchases constituted family financial assistance. Elena's stammering response about planning to surprise family members with gifts failed to account for the vast majority of funds allocated to her personal use, exposing the selfishness underlying her claimed altruistic motives. Closing arguments crystallized the competing narratives that had defined the trial, with each legal team making final appeals to the jury's sense of justice and family understanding. Valdez acknowledged Elena's mistakes while emphasizing her lack of prior criminal history and her genuine remorse for the harm caused to family relationships. He urged the jury to consider whether Elena's actions warranted the severe consequences of felony conviction and potential imprisonment. Kellerman's closing argument focused relentlessly on Elena's choices and their consequences, emphasizing that criminal conduct required accountability regardless of family relationships or claimed good intentions. She reminded the jury that Elena had multiple opportunities to confess her fraud and seek family forgiveness, but had instead continued lying even under oath during trial testimony. The prosecutor argued that Elena's sophistication and planning proved criminal intent beyond any reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours over 2 days before reaching their verdict, a time frame that suggested serious consideration of the evidence and legal standards. When they filed back into the courtroom to announce their decision, Elena's face was pale and drawn, her confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety about her fate. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, flanked by Detective Martinez and Victim Services Coordinator Lisa Park, who had supported me throughout the trial process. The jury foreman, a middle-aged engineering manager named David Chen, stood to deliver the verdict with solemnity appropriate to the gravity of the moment. On the charge of forgery in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Elena's attorney placed a steadying hand on her shoulder as she visibly swayed upon hearing the convictions on all major charges. The guilty verdicts validated everything I had endured during the investigation and trial process, confirming that Elena's actions constituted serious crimes rather than family misunderstandings. Yet the moment felt hollow rather than triumphant, marking the official end of the sister relationship that had defined my childhood and young adulthood. Elena was now a convicted felon, someone whose choices had permanently altered our family's future and destroyed the trust that had once bound us together. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, providing time for pre-sentence investigation and victim impact statements that would help Judge Torres determine appropriate punishment. Elena remained free on bail pending sentencing, but her conviction had triggered additional restrictions that further limited her movement and activities. She was required to surrender her passport and report weekly to a probation officer, effectively ending any possibility of returning to Los Angeles before serving her sentence. The victim impact statement I prepared for Elena's sentencing hearing became an opportunity to articulate the full scope of damage her actions had caused beyond simple financial loss. I wrote about the destruction of family trust, the emotional trauma of discovering systematic deception, and the ongoing challenges of rebuilding my life after such profound betrayal. The statement also addressed the broader impact on Mama and extended family members who had been caught in the aftermath of Elena's crimes. Writing about Elena's impact on my life forced me to confront how fundamentally she had changed my relationship with trust, family loyalty, and personal security. The sister who had once been my closest confidant had revealed herself capable of elaborate deception and theft, calling into question every assumption I had made about family bonds and shared values. The inheritance Papa had intended to provide security had instead become a source of legal expenses and emotional trauma that would affect me for years. The sentencing hearing drew a smaller crowd than the trial, with only immediate family members and court personnel present for Elena's final appearance before imprisonment. Mama sat behind Elena at the defense table, her face etched with the strain of watching both daughters suffer through a criminal process that had no winners regardless of the outcome. Extended family members who had pressured me to drop charges were notably absent, having lost interest once the legal machinery moved beyond their influence. Judge Torres reviewed the pre-sentence investigation report, victim impact statements, and character references submitted by both sides before announcing Elena's punishment. His comments reflected careful consideration of the evidence and the competing factors involved in sentencing a first-time offender for serious financial crimes. He acknowledged Elena's lack of prior criminal history while emphasizing the calculated nature of her fraud and the substantial losses involved. The defendant's actions demonstrate a level of premeditation and sophistication that cannot be dismissed as momentary poor judgment, Judge Torres stated. She systematically deceived family members, forged legal documents, and planned to steal nearly $3 million from her own sister. While family relationships complicate this case emotionally, they cannot excuse criminal conduct or eliminate the need for accountability. Elena's sentence of 30 months in state prison, followed by 4 years of supervised probation, fell within the guidelines for her conviction, but was more severe than her attorney had hoped. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for my legal expenses and costs associated with resolving the property ownership disputes. The restitution amount exceeded $80,000, money that Elena clearly didn't possess and would struggle to earn given her felony conviction. The additional requirement that Elena complete 200 hours of community service focused on elder abuse prevention reflected Judge Torres' recognition that her crimes had exploited family relationships in ways that caused harm beyond simple financial loss. She would be required to speak with senior groups about financial fraud prevention, sharing her own story as a cautionary tale about the warning signs of family financial abuse. Elena's immediate transportation to the State Women's Correctional Facility in Perryville meant that our final conversation as sisters occurred in the courthouse hallway moments after her sentencing. She was handcuffed and flanked by corrections officers, her designer clothes replaced by standard orange jail attire that emphasized her new status as a convicted felon. When she asked if I would visit her in prison, I couldn't provide the answer she wanted to hear. "I need time to process everything that's happened," I told her honestly. "Maybe someday we can rebuild some kind of relationship, but right now I'm not ready for that." Elena's tears were genuine, but I had learned that her emotions didn't necessarily correspond to genuine remorse or accountability for her actions. She had cried just as convincingly while lying under oath during trial. The months following Elena's imprisonment were marked by a strange combination of relief and grief that left me emotionally exhausted despite the resolution of legal uncertainties. The properties Elena had tried to steal were finally mine free and clear, but the inheritance Papa had intended as a blessing had become forever associated with betrayal and family destruction. I could now make necessary repairs and improvements without legal constraints, but every decision reminded me of Elena's attempts to steal these assets for her personal benefit. Mama's emotional state remained fragile as she struggled to accept Elena's conviction and imprisonment, while maintaining a relationship with me that had been complicated by the criminal proceedings. She visited Elena regularly at Perryville, making the 2-hour drive every other weekend to provide emotional support and commissary money. These visits were emotionally devastating for Mama, who returned home drained and grieving for the daughter she felt she had lost to the criminal justice system. Our own relationship required careful rebuilding as we navigated the aftermath of Elena's crimes and their impact on our family dynamics. Mama had borrowed against her home to post Elena's bail, creating financial obligations that stretched her modest retirement income. She had also spent thousands of dollars on Elena's legal defense, money that could have been used for her own security and comfort during her golden years. I offered to help Mama with her financial obligations related to Elena's case, but she refused assistance with the stubborn pride that had characterized her response to hardship throughout her life. "I made those choices to help Elena," she said during one of our difficult conversations about money. "I have to live with the consequences just like she does." Her refusal to accept help was frustrating but also admirable, reflecting the same independence and self-reliance that had enabled her to raise 4 children as a single mother. Professional counseling continued to be essential as I worked through the complex emotions surrounding Elena's imprisonment and the permanent changes to our family structure. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that grief for the sister relationship I had lost was natural and healthy, even though Elena's crimes had made that relationship impossible to continue. The Elena I had loved and trusted had never really existed outside of my own perceptions and hopes, making the mourning process particularly complex and painful. Therapy also helped me recognize patterns of codependency and people-pleasing that had made me vulnerable to Elena's manipulation throughout our adult relationship. My tendency to accommodate others' needs while minimizing my own had enabled Elena's financial irresponsibility and created opportunities for her to exploit my trust. Learning to establish appropriate boundaries and prioritize my own welfare was an ongoing process that extended far beyond my relationship with Elena. The inheritance properties required significant attention as I assumed full responsibility for their management and improvement. The Oak Avenue house needed a complete kitchen renovation to attract quality tenants and command higher rental rates. The Pine Boulevard property required landscaping improvements and exterior painting to enhance its curb appeal and market value. These projects provided tangible goals and measurable progress that helped offset the emotional devastation of Elena's betrayal. Working with contractors and managing renovation projects gave me new confidence in my ability to make independent decisions and solve complex problems without family input or support. The skills I developed during this period extended beyond property management to include project planning, budget management, and quality control that enhanced my professional capabilities and personal self-reliance. The financial returns from the improved properties exceeded my projections, generating rental income that provided genuine security for the first time in my adult life. Papa's vision of real estate as long-term wealth building was proving accurate, though the path to that security had been far more complicated and painful than anyone could have anticipated. The properties that Elena had tried to steal were becoming the foundation for financial independence that would honor Papa's memory and values. 8 months after Elena's imprisonment, I made the decision to sell the Pine Boulevard property to fund a down payment on a small office building that could house my own property management company. The sale netted enough profit to cover the down payment, initial operating expenses, and 6 months of living expenses while I transitioned from employee to entrepreneur. Starting my own business felt like the natural evolution of skills and experience gained through managing the family properties and navigating Elena's fraud. Rodriguez Property Management opened with 3 clients beyond my own remaining rental property, all referrals from colleagues who respected my professionalism and attention to detail. The business grew steadily as satisfied clients recommended my services to other property owners seeking reliable management and maintenance coordination. Within 18 months, the company was managing 47 properties and generating enough income to support a modest but comfortable lifestyle. The professional success felt particularly meaningful because it was built entirely on my own capabilities and reputation, rather than family connections or inherited advantages. Elena's attempt to steal my inheritance had inadvertently forced me to develop independence and self-reliance that might have taken years to achieve under normal circumstances. The betrayal that had devastated me emotionally had also revealed strengths and capabilities I had never fully recognized or utilized. Elena became eligible for early release after serving 22 months of her 30-month sentence, having earned time credits through participation in prison educational programs and exemplary behavior during incarceration. The Arizona Department of Corrections notified me of her pending release date and upcoming parole supervision requirements, standard procedure for notifying crime victims about offender status changes. The notification triggered anxiety about whether Elena would attempt to contact me upon release and how I would respond to any such efforts at reconciliation. Dr. Reeves helped me prepare psychologically for Elena's return to society while maintaining the healthy boundaries I had established during her imprisonment. I had no obligation to rebuild our relationship, regardless of any changes Elena might have experienced during her incarceration. Elena's actual release occurred on a Tuesday morning in November, with Mama providing transportation from the correctional facility to a halfway house in Central Phoenix, where Elena would complete the transitional phase of her sentence. The conditions of her parole included restrictions on travel, regular reporting to a supervision officer, and continued prohibition on contacting me without court approval. She was also required to maintain employment and continue paying restitution for my legal expenses at a rate determined by her income level. The halfway house placement was temporary, designed to provide structure and support during Elena's reintegration into society after nearly 2 years of imprisonment. She would need to find permanent housing and employment within 90 days, challenging goals given her felony conviction and the gap in her employment history. The acting career she had pursued in Los Angeles was effectively over, replaced by the harsh reality of finding work with a criminal background. Mama's relief at Elena's release was tempered by practical concerns about her daughter's future prospects and ongoing legal obligations. Elena's restitution debt to me would continue for years, unless she could secure well-paying employment, which seemed unlikely given the barriers faced by convicted felons in the job market. The halfway house provided temporary shelter but not the emotional support and family connection that Elena would need to rebuild her life successfully. 3 weeks after Elena's release, I received a handwritten letter forwarded through my attorney, complying with the court-ordered restrictions on direct contact. The letter was 6 pages long, filled with expressions of remorse and detailed descriptions of Elena's prison experience and personal transformation. She wrote about participating in financial literacy classes, earning her GED equivalency, and developing new understanding of the harm caused by her actions. Elena's letter also contained specific apologies for forging my signature, stealing my inheritance, and lying under oath during trial. She acknowledged that her claims of good intentions had been self-serving rationalizations designed to minimize her accountability rather than genuine explanations of her behavior. The letter concluded with a request for eventual forgiveness and the possibility of rebuilding some form of relationship, though she acknowledged that such reconciliation would need to occur according to my timeline and comfort level. Reading Elena's letter triggered complex emotions that had been dormant during her imprisonment, forcing me to confront questions about forgiveness, family loyalty, and the possibility of redemption after fundamental betrayal. Her expressions of remorse seemed more genuine than her trial testimony, but I had learned to be skeptical of Elena's emotional presentations given her history of manipulation and deception. Dr. Reeves encouraged me to take time processing Elena's letter before making any decisions about responding or potentially meeting with her in the future. Forgiveness was a personal choice that couldn't be rushed or forced, and genuine healing required authentic accountability rather than simply expressing regret about consequences. Elena's letter was a positive step, but rebuilding trust would require consistent demonstration of changed behavior over an extended period. I ultimately decided not to respond to Elena's letter immediately, choosing instead to focus on my own continued healing and the business expansion that was providing both financial security and personal fulfillment. Rodriguez Property Management had grown to 73 managed properties and required my full attention to maintain the high standards that had built our reputation in the competitive Phoenix market. The second anniversary of Papa's death arrived with a mix of sadness for his absence and gratitude for the strength I had developed through the challenges following his passing. The inheritance he had provided had ultimately served its intended purpose despite Elena's attempts to steal it, providing the foundation for financial independence and professional success. The properties he had carefully acquired through decades of hard work had become the springboard for achievements that honored his memory and values. Mama's health remained stable, though the stress of recent years had aged her noticeably and required ongoing attention to her emotional and physical needs. She continued visiting Elena at the halfway house, providing transportation to job interviews and moral support during her difficult transition back to society. These visits were emotionally exhausting for Mama, but she felt obligated to support Elena despite the crimes that had devastated our family. Elena eventually found employment as a receptionist at a dental office, work that paid modestly but satisfied her parole requirements for maintaining steady income. Her felony conviction prevented her from pursuing better-paying positions that required background checks, limiting her career options to entry-level positions in businesses willing to hire people with criminal records. The restitution payments to me were automatically deducted from her paycheck, ensuring consistent progress toward repaying her debt regardless of her personal financial management. 6 months after Elena's release, she requested permission through the court system to contact me directly for the purpose of making amends and potentially rebuilding our relationship. The request included letters of support from her parole officer, halfway house supervisor, and employer, all attesting to her positive adjustment and continued expressions of remorse for her criminal behavior. Judge Torres granted Elena's request for supervised contact, allowing her to meet with me in the presence of a court-appointed mediator trained in family reconciliation after criminal conduct. The meeting would be voluntary on my part and could be terminated at any time if I felt uncomfortable or threatened. Elena would be prohibited from asking for money, assistance with her legal obligations, or forgiveness beyond what I was willing to offer freely. The prospect of seeing Elena face-to-face for the first time since her sentencing hearing triggered intense anxiety and uncertainty about whether such a meeting would be helpful or harmful to my ongoing healing process. Part of me wanted to hear Elena's apologies and assess whether she had genuinely changed during her incarceration and parole. Another part of me feared that any contact would reopen emotional wounds that had finally begun to heal during her absence. After extensive discussion with Dr. Reeves and careful consideration of my own emotional readiness, I agreed to a single supervised meeting with Elena at the Family Court Mediation Center. The meeting would last no more than 2 hours and would focus solely on Elena's accountability for her actions and any amends she wished to make. There would be no discussion of future relationship possibilities or expectations beyond acknowledging the harm that had been caused. The mediation room was small and sterile, furnished with a rectangular table and 4 chairs arranged to promote calm discussion rather than confrontational positioning. Elena arrived wearing conservative business attire that emphasized her attempts to project respectability and rehabilitation. She looked older and more worn than I remembered, with premature gray threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before her imprisonment. The mediator, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, established ground rules for our conversation and emphasized that the session was designed to provide Elena with an opportunity to make amends, rather than to pressure me toward forgiveness or reconciliation. Elena would be allowed to speak without interruption for 30 minutes, after which I could respond or ask questions as I felt comfortable. The remainder of the session would be structured dialogue focusing on accountability and understanding, rather than future relationship planning. Elena's statement was carefully prepared and delivered with obvious emotional difficulty, acknowledging the specific crimes she had committed and the comprehensive harm they had caused to me, Mama, and our extended family. She accepted full responsibility for forging my signature, stealing my inheritance, and lying under oath, without attempting to justify or minimize her actions through claims of good intentions or family assistance. Her description of prison life and the personal growth she claimed to have experienced was detailed and seemingly genuine, though I remained skeptical about the depth and permanence of any changes she might have undergone. Elena spoke about participating in therapy groups for people who had committed crimes against family members, learning about the psychological impact of financial abuse, and developing new understanding of the trust relationships she had violated through her actions. When Elena concluded her prepared statement, she looked directly at me for the first time during the session and said simply, "I'm sorry, Carmen. I know that doesn't fix anything or change what I did, but I needed you to hear it from me directly." Her words seemed sincere, but I had heard Elena apologize before while continuing to minimize her accountability and blame others for misunderstanding her intentions. My response was brief and focused on the boundaries I had established during my healing process rather than any assessment of Elena's rehabilitation or potential for change. I acknowledged her apology while making clear that forgiveness was not something I could offer immediately or upon request. Trust, once destroyed through systematic deception, required consistent demonstration of changed behavior over extended periods before it could be rebuilt, if at all. The conversation that followed was stilted and careful, with Dr. Walsh guiding us through discussions of Elena's understanding of the harm she had caused and my ongoing recovery from the trauma of her betrayal. Elena's responses suggested genuine remorse and accountability, but also revealed her hope that expressing contrition would lead to eventual reconciliation and restoration of our sister relationship. When I explained that I remained uncertain about whether any future relationship was possible or desirable, Elena's disappointment was obvious, despite her attempts to maintain composure. She had clearly hoped that her imprisonment and expressions of remorse would be sufficient to earn forgiveness and family restoration, revealing that her understanding of the healing process remained incomplete and somewhat self-centered. The session concluded without dramatic reconciliation or definitive rejection, leaving both Elena and me with unresolved questions about the possibility of rebuilding trust and connection after such fundamental betrayal. Dr. Walsh provided resources for ongoing family mediation if we chose to pursue additional sessions, but emphasized that healing was an individual process that couldn't be rushed or forced through external pressure. I left the mediation center feeling emotionally drained, but also clearer about my own boundaries and healing process. Elena's apology had been more genuine than her trial testimony, but it hadn't erased the damage she had caused or restored the trust she had destroyed. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a gift I chose to give, rather than an obligation I owed based on family relationships or Elena's expressions of remorse. The months following our supervised meeting passed without additional contact between Elena and me, though I received occasional updates about her progress through Mama's weekly phone calls. Elena had maintained steady employment, completed her halfway house requirements, and moved into her own apartment, meeting all the basic obligations of her parole supervision. She had also begun attending community college classes in the evenings, working toward an associate degree in business administration that might improve her career prospects despite her criminal record. Elena's efforts at rehabilitation were commendable, but they didn't obligate me to rebuild our relationship or trust her with significant roles in my life. She had demonstrated that she was capable of elaborate deception and betrayal when it served her interests, and no amount of good behavior during court supervision could guarantee that she wouldn't repeat such actions if circumstances provided sufficient motivation and opportunity. 2 years after our mediation session, Elena completed her parole supervision successfully and was released from all court-ordered restrictions on her movement and activities. She had paid approximately 30% of her restitution obligation through automatic payroll deductions, with the remainder converted to a civil judgment that would continue indefinitely until satisfied in full. Her completion of parole marked the end of the criminal justice system's involvement in our family conflict, leaving us free to determine our own relationship without external oversight or intervention. Elena sent a brief letter through Mama to acknowledge this milestone and express hope that we might consider rebuilding some form of connection as adults who had both grown and changed through difficult experiences. She made no specific requests for contact or forgiveness, simply expressing openness to whatever relationship I might be willing to consider in the future. The letter was respectful and appropriate, suggesting that Elena had indeed learned something about boundaries and accountability during her legal troubles. I read Elena's letter with interest, but no immediate inclination to respond or initiate contact. The life I had built during her absence was satisfying and successful, providing financial security and personal fulfillment that had never depended on her presence or approval. Rodriguez Property Management continued growing steadily, now managing over 100 properties and employing 3 full-time staff members who shared my commitment to professional excellence and client service. The business success felt particularly meaningful because it demonstrated capabilities and achievements that Elena could never steal or diminish through deception or betrayal. The skills I had developed through managing family properties and navigating criminal proceedings had translated into professional expertise that provided independence and security based entirely on my own merit and effort. Mama's health remained stable, though she continued aging noticeably under the stress of recent years and ongoing worry about Elena's future prospects. She had developed diabetes that required careful monitoring and medication management, adding medical concerns to the financial pressures that had characterized her life since Papa's death. I helped with her medical expenses and transportation to appointments, maintaining our close relationship while respecting her pride and independence. The 3rd anniversary of Elena's conviction arrived with a sense of completion and closure that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of her betrayal and trial. The inheritance Papa had intended to provide security had ultimately served its purpose despite Elena's attempts to steal it, enabling me to build a business and lifestyle that honored his values and sacrifices. The properties he had acquired through decades of hard work had become the foundation for achievements that proved his faith in my capabilities had been well placed. Standing in the office of Rodriguez Property Management on that anniversary morning, surrounded by evidence of professional success built on ethical principles and hard work, I realized that Elena's betrayal had inadvertently provided the motivation and opportunity for personal growth that might never have occurred under normal circumstances. The sister who had tried to steal my inheritance had instead forced me to discover strength and capabilities that exceeded anything Papa could have imagined when he structured his will to provide for my security. The woman looking back at me from the office mirror was not the accommodating younger sister who had walked into Attorney Williams' office expecting to celebrate a family milestone. Elena's crimes had destroyed that person, replacing her with someone capable of independent decision-making, business leadership, and self-protection that would serve me well regardless of what challenges the future might bring. Elena remained a convicted felon, working an entry-level job and struggling to rebuild a life destroyed by her own criminal choices. I had become a successful business owner providing valuable services to clients who respected my professionalism and integrity. The contrast between our outcomes reflected the natural consequences of our respective choices and values, proving that character and ethics ultimately determine success more than inherited advantages or family connections. Whether Elena and I would ever rebuild any form of relationship remained an open question that only time would answer. The trust she had destroyed couldn't be restored through expressions of remorse or demonstrations of good behavior during court supervision. Genuine reconciliation would require years of consistent accountability and respect for boundaries that Elena might not be willing or able to maintain indefinitely. For now, I was content with the life I had built from the ashes of her betrayal, grateful for the strength developed through surviving such fundamental deception, and focused on the future opportunities that ethical success had created. The inheritance Papa had provided had served its intended purpose despite Elena's crimes, proving that love and family bonds could survive even the most devastating betrayals when they were based on genuine values rather than convenience or obligation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.